Welcome to the latest series of the FODcast, where we bring you the latest insights into the future of digital commerce. In Season 6, we continue to interview some of the most respected professionals in the industry as we broaden the topics to cover what it takes to build a business within e-commerce, navigating through business change, as well as the future of technology within digital commerce. As we continue our journey to have one of the best podcasts within commerce, we ask you to like and share within your network if you enjoy our content.
So welcome to another edition of the FODcast, where we talk about the future of digital commerce. And today we have a head-to-head, a very much a first for the FODcast. We have two big hitters within the MACH composable headless space joining me today. And first up, we have Sonja. Sonja is a leader in the digital experience tech and co-founder of the MACH Alliance, now 100 plus members strong. With over 2 decades of experience driving growth in strategic roles for vendors like Bloomreach and Content Stack, she now works as an independent strategic advisor. And Sonja brings her expertise in strategic storytelling to positioning, messaging, and analyst relations for tech companies within and beyond the MACH ecosystem. So welcome, Sonja.
Thank you for having me.
A wonderful bio. Jim is joining us again as a leader in e-commerce and integration technology, specializing in composable and MACH architecture to drive agile transformation. And as CEO of Patchworks, he empowers businesses to streamline complex integrations and maximize operational efficiency, working with renowned brands like Gymshark, Castor, Belstaff, and Mint Velvet. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Tim. That was a brilliant introduction. It's almost like it was scripted. Nice one.
Thank you very much. That was literally nothing to do with ChatGPT in any way, shape, or form. Seriously, welcome, guys. And this is a really good one for us. We've never done a head-to-head. I think we had some conversation before we decided to do the podcast, and there was a kind of agreement across the board that this is a kind of an inflection point for MACH, for composable, for headless. And we've also seen how MACH has reacted to that in recent times with some of the articles and the outgoing messaging from them. There's a lot to cover, and we're going to try and cover it in 1 hour. Let's see if we can manage that. For me, I'd like to start with predictions for next year, which would be very interesting to get your views on, and how the MACH Alliance is going to play into those predictions. So for me, first question would be, what, in your view, are the major shifts you expect next year in the digital commerce space, and how is that directly relational to MACH? Sonja, I'll let you go first.
Can I start? Yeah, I had the pleasure of looking through all those big Forrester Gartner predictions over the last few weeks. And it's fascinating because if you look at them, the one commonality is that the predictions are contradicting themselves left, right, and center, which is always an interesting point in time when nobody is quite sure what's happening. So if you ask me, I think 25 is going to be a big change again. 2020 was a crazy change in commerce. I think 25 will be again for 2 reasons. The first one is I see brands that buy commerce technology get a lot smarter at how to buy them and more emancipated from the fads and the trends and the hypes, and really asking what is right for me, for my situation, for my technology, for my goals. And I think vendors will need to adjust to that. I think a lot of them are scandalously underprepared for the granularity in that buying demand that they will then also meet. So they will need to focus, and they'll need to do and sell service differently. And the last thing, and this is, I think, where Jim and I could geek out for hours, if not days, is all the complexity in commerce that we've been working with and dealing with, especially on the composable side, will be simplified insanely in the next year. I have seen the craziest MVPs of AI, ML, Gen AI enabled technology that is there today, but the world doesn't yet know. And next year, the world will know. And lives will be so much easier. So I look forward to 25 actually. And 24 was crap. Can we just say that how it was? But 25 is going to be amazing again.
No disagreement.
23 wasn't great either, Sonja, to be fair.
Yeah, 23 was meh. And then 24 was like, let's just forget about this year for so many reasons. Yeah. And then 25 is going to be fun for everybody again, right?
Things can only get better, as D. Ream said in the night. Jim?
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of things that Sonja said there. And I'd like to sort of build on one thing, which I think is interesting, especially when the analysts, you look at the analyst reports, they're naturally geared to big retailers and big infrastructure, big technology partners. Ultimately, it's very hard to get into those magic quadrants as a company the size of, say, a Patchworks. So I think it's sometimes worth looking at things like G2, which are more kind of mid-market. And the reason I think that's interesting for enterprise is the disruptive impact of what I've been calling for years, because I nicked it from somebody else, the democratization of SaaS, or via SaaS. So what's really interesting is while the enterprise vendors, where a lot of the MACH Alliance principles came from, as you know, I've been working in e-commerce for 20 plus years. Did a lot of work with ATG, where Kelly from the MACH Alliance obviously worked back in the day as well. Put Herbert in over sort of 50 customers around the world with my agency back in the day. And it kind of works. That monolithic approach works really well because e-commerce was in a kind of second, probably e-commerce 2.0, maybe if you want to call it that. But they immediately started saying, I need to deconstruct this monolith because I need to have better content management system, right? So because I've got content management people are all around the world, and they're doing different languages, and they've got different marketing to do in different. Classic example of that would be a company like Wiggle back in the day, who have a UK brand and an Australian brand. And funnily enough, because of the southern northern hemisphere splits, the summer cycling rush happens at different times of year, right? So they need that separate control of their different areas. And so a lot of that, drove into the principles of the best of breeds composable of the MACH Alliance. Ultimately, let's see if we can deconstruct those monoliths, put in an e-commerce engine that can deal with that, and then have separate, teams working on a enterprise content management system, as an example. Now, what's interesting is while all that's happening, in the corner, the rise of the Shopifys and the big commerces and the other SaaS platforms, PrestaShop in France and Oxid in Germany, and all that kind of what you have to say the smaller customers ultimately has happened. And that has now meant that enterprises are thinking about it. And that's a classic disruptive play. I'm 50 plus now, sadly. And I've been through a number of disruptive moments in life in general. So AI is definitely a disruptive point, but so is the kind of rise of these platforms that now enterprises are saying, do you know what, that's good enough for my front end. And I won't get sacked for buying Shopify, for instance, because, they're a $2 billion plus quarter business. And I'll live with the fact that I want to have sort of a different store in Australia and the UK, and I'll use a platform to keep those in sync to our strategic back end or something. So I think that's going to be an interesting one. And to take that slightly further than 25, because I'm really optimistic about 25. There are big projects kicking off now, and there are people out to RFP, which is fantastic, and some really big. I mean, the interesting thing about 24 being crap, 23, and then 2021 and 2020 with COVID was there's a rush during COVID. People put some technology in maybe, or if you had a pretty good technology stack, you just double down on that, right? You just double down on what you had in place. You're getting to an inflection point with this kind of coming 25, I think, where people are going, okay, my platform is either really old, and I've got to do something about it now because it's starting to cost me more. It's on fire, right? So I need to do something. But we're seeing some major customers here in the UK, or major prospects here in the UK, or retailers who are, at that point, they're running on 20-year-old digital tech, and they've got to do something now. But you've also got the kind of the new customers coming up. And I think you look past 25, it gets super interesting, because with the rise of marketplaces, the rise of TikTok, Instagram shop, Facebook shop, for those guys, will they even bother putting in an e-commerce platform? Because they can get their orders different ways, right? So what's fascinating, what I love about this, is the data still needs to be composed. It still needs to be sent around. You still need that kind of best of breed approach to get what you need. It's just, we were saying in the preamble to the recording, I don't mind mentioning it now, everything's moving quicker all the time, so that disruption is getting bigger and bigger. And that's why my prediction will be wrong. I'm rubbish at prediction. So I'll say that right now. The one thing I'll predict is I'm wrong about my prediction.
Fully caveated. I'm going to be completely wrong, but okay. So kind of leads nicely into my next question, which is the demands of the buyers. And so we've talked a bit about TikTok and marketplaces, and that's dictated by the demands of the buyers. So how do you see those demands evolving? And are the vendors, in your view, ready to meet those evolving expectations of the buyers?
I think I'll just jump in here now because I like wrote all down these notes while you were speaking, Jim. I think the expectations of the buyers like beautifully tie in with a few things that Jim said. Let's double down on this G2 aspect here for a second. So why has G2 become so important? Because it gives us a relatively unbiased view on how good is technology that I have used as a buyer, like as a brand. And I do see that go far beyond the mid-market. Enterprise buyers look at G2 just as much. And what we're also in 25 seeing for the first time is that the majority of the market, the majority of the companies has already adopted SaaS software, has already adopted cloud native software. So I too am well above the 40s. When I grew up in tech, we had a very reliable 3 to 5 year replatforming cadence across the categories in digital experiences, some faster, some less. And those were driven by I couldn't be bothered to upgrade because it was so resource intensive last year, the year before, the year before. Oh no, now I'm on old software. I need to get something new. Might as well get something new that I actually like. And that has kind of stopped for the majority of the market because we're on SaaS and because that upgrade process and the technical debt now sits with the vendors to manage. So unless my vendor is really scandalously wrong about where the market is heading or is appalling in the way that I do business with them, changing isn't as urgent and as business critical anymore as it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right? And that means, how am I being treated as a customer? How am I being serviced? How good is the vendor with their product vision and their product strategy? How good have they been in the past? How much do I buy into their roadmap and their vision now becomes much more important than making text bold buttons that I have right now. So the selling actually happens on the customer success side, not so much in the sales team anymore. And buyers know that, and buyers ask different questions now, even on their RFPs than they used to do before. And the buyers, Jim, they're younger than you and I. Holy crap, that also happened. That also now pivoted, that the majority of enterprise buyers too are below the age of 40, and they want to even buy big ticket deals, self-service online, if they know from G2 and others that the software is something that will probably work for them. So not even, Tim, talking about, do they need to be on TikTok? Do they need to do this? Do they need the other? The way that software is now being bought and consumed, now we're at the end of that 5-year period from the transition to SaaS, and we're feeling it. We're seeing it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Sorry.
I agree with that completely.
I was on my little soapbox.
Yeah. But it's
I'm
really
down now. We
right?
can have a conversation again.
I've been that younger tech buyer in the past, if you know what I mean. I think it's an interesting one because quite often during a tech buying process, you concentrate on the features and functions of getting it built and getting it in, if you know what I mean, especially in our space, right? In iPads, that's what people really care about. And that's where the no code, low code and all the things that we've been concentrating on there. But I joke when I'm introducing Patchworks that we're technical plumbing, and like plumbing, once you've done the work, you never want to hear about it again, right? You want the taps to work and you want the toilet to flush and everything else to work. That's all you need, if you know what I mean. It has to be secure and safe. So, it's been an interesting one recently because we get RFPs in and there's loads of stuff about how easy it is to get live, because that's the hard part often with integrations. But once it is live, you've got to be secure. You need the ISO 27001. You need the true auto scaling, because it's amazing how many people say they're SaaS And then you discover that, well, yeah, we're SaaS except for those big customers. We give them their own hosting. You're like, well, that's not true. We have this in the MACH Alliance, right? So I know when we were doing the missions piece, like, that's not true multi-tenant SaaS thing, guys. Oh, isn't it? Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's in the cloud. Okay. It's in a server somewhere. I get it. So that's the really important part is that can run through. And I think that's what's really become apparent with that younger cohort of tech buyers is that they're a lot more savvy when it comes to that. Because they've grown up with it, right? You've grown up, you are those digital natives that have grown up with a phone in your hand and working with social media. The other problem, though, from the other side of it, I would argue, as a vendor, is that you're also used to the Apple and Android app stores where things are $50 a month. And so the pressure on pricing becomes really real. And what I'd say to other vendors out there is that's where you have to be, honest and transparent. You don't want to declare your margins, although if you're a limited company, you probably wouldn't go and see them anyway, if you know what I mean. But, make it obvious why this bit is expensive. So, it might be that, again, in our world, we're going to put images through your platform. Well, that's huge amounts of data. And our pricing is normally based around orders, inventory, price, that kind of stuff, right? So if you want to use us for what's probably not the best use for Patchworks, then, maybe you should go and look up another MACH Alliance partner of ours that can do that piece of work. Obviously, I'm talking about a meeting I had literally 45 minutes ago. It's if you're honest about it and you have that conversation, they're savvy enough to go, oh yeah, you're right. I didn't see that fair use policy. Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, let's have a conversation. So that's quite nice. That's quite a difference, if you know what I mean. You're dealing with procurement people who've got a certain level of tech that probably wasn't there 15 years ago even.
Yeah, and it does demand that value conversation. Isn't that a wonderful thing that as vendors, I say we, I'm not really a vendor anymore, but one gets forced to articulate value by those savvy buyers too. Wonderful. Thank God.
Yeah. And actually, to double down on your customer success points on, you're absolutely right there as well. I mean, there is a certain amount of, again, looking at my cohort, my competitor space. I spoke to a prospect yesterday and they said, yeah, this is what everyone else said. No code, low code, auto scaling, multi-tenant SaaS. Why are you different? And it is about listening to your customers and partners and making sure that you play that back in. So G2, Capterra, these kind of review sites, they're really good for that, without a doubt. But actually, also, it's really important as a vendor. We track our partner happiness through a partner NPS score. We track our customer happiness through a NPS score. We track all our, ticket turnaround times. Because again, once you're live, if you're getting loads of tickets and you're not answering them, even if they're really easy, then you're gonna lose customers ultimately, and then you'll get a bad reputation in the market, which is certainly I've seen with a number of vendors over the years. And actually, what's really interesting, come back to your point from the earlier answer, that's where AI can start to play a really, really good role, actually, because there's really simple stuff there that we can do to expose our APIs to our own chatbots, if you know what I mean. So a classic example would be, we're introducing this soon on our side. We have an API that exposes now, if you track your data, where your orders are. You can say what system it's got into. And we can do that via an interface, but we're working with, we use Zendesk, right? And they just bought Ultimate AI. I met Sarah and the founders at a thing a couple of years ago. Amazing bit of software, right? And why would you not put that in? Because actually, that quite often people raise a ticket for that, have to wait for ticket resolution time and everything else. Whereas AI can get that data really easy, so it can consume our own APIs as well as as well as the kind of large learning model around all the documentation. That kind of thing can really help, and that's a really good use case for improving customer journeys right now without being too scared of all the big stuff that's coming down the pipe next year, which is coming.
Which is coming. Yeah. Love that doom and gloom thing at the end there.
I put on my Austrian accent.
So with the view of what's happening in 2025 in the future and MACH at the inflection point that we believe it's at, where do you guys see the most adoption coming from?
The most adoption.
The adoption of MACH. Yeah. Sorry, Sonja.
Sorry, yeah.
Do you want me to start quickly, Sonja? Yeah, I just because I am. The adoption of MACH from our perspective at the minute is very much around the front end technology still, from what we're seeing. and the supportive technologies of front end. So I'd argue content generation, product content, the actual content itself that goes onto the website, and the commerce engine. There's a lot of adoption of Mac coming in there. And what's interesting, and I think we'll probably talk about it later on in this, is actually the rise of companies like Shopify, where you then integrate in the Mac technologies in front of that. Content stack, Contentful, Storyblock, etc. Name on, if you know what I mean. And then your discovery software, your Blue Reaches, etc. from that side of it, Algolia. Obviously, you've got your product data coming in from your Pimbleys and Akinios and Saucifys and all those in the Mac Alliance. I'm trying to remember them all by heart here, so I don't get them wrong, if you know what I mean. What's interesting is then you've got the OMSs, you've got OneStock and Fluent, and you've got us at Patchworks and Pipe 17 and Zytec, as integration platforms in the middle of that. There's not a lot down the other end, if you know what I mean. There's not really a Mac ERP yet. There's a couple looking to get in, I know, and we've had the conversation, and we'd love to get some more of that in. Same on the warehouse management side as well. And that's somewhere where you end up dealing with quite often a more legacy piece of software, which has got APIs and runs in the cloud, and it's headless to a certain extent. But that's quite an interesting kind of area where we don't see it, frankly. I don't know what you think, Sonja, from your side.
Yeah, I have seen the first ERPs that say they're Mach curious or compatible, or I don't know. I don't think they're certified yet. I think in commerce use cases, there's been a lot of ambition to go Mach with brands, and now that road needs to meet reality as well. So I do think when we're thinking about where does adoption start most, then in the majority segment, in the mainstream buyer for commerce, and the job of the MACH Alliance and its members will be to actually simplify adopting MACH approaches and the hybrid ones, Jim, to your point, 100%, because that whole idea of this isn't a polarized conversation, right? There's no either or. It needs to be something that fits together. Certainly when you're going further down the back end with warehouses and ERPs, some of the principles that the MACH Alliance advocates right now were geared for the digital experience and are potentially not even realistic in the I wanted to call it plumbing, but then you said you're plumbing, so whatever we call that, that bottom
foundations, maybe.
Foundations. Thank you very much for helping a non-native speaker out. I think also the adoption of MACH then, and I see that happening, is going into adjacent industries and use cases. So financial services, for one's been talking about composable banking for a really long time. We see a lot more actually happening there as well. Healthcare too, a lot of that driven from new way of taking care of patients and how to manage patient processes. And I think that will ripple through more other industries and not digital transactional processes. Really talk about composable business and the tech to enable that. Curiously enough, I've heard an analyst say government, they see the biggest uptake for composable, which I would not have thought happens so quickly. So if anybody wants to send me a LinkedIn message and explain that in more detail, please do. But yeah.
Okay.
Interestingly, sorry, Tim, just one of my old Generic guys, who's now at Elastic Path, he worked in the government for a bit. And it's when cloud was becoming a thing. And I went and met him in the House of Parliament Refectory in Bar, which is fantastic. It's a nice thing to do for someone who's never worked in government. And he said he was amazed that I went to a cloud conference and it was mainly government and banking in there. And it was banking and stock market trading because they could use that burst capacity of cloud for, big arbitrage trades or whatever else they needed to do, where it wasn't necessarily time sensitive and they wanted to host it themselves, but they needed that compute power. And government, similar thing, ultimately. Quite often they get very large data sets. Tax returns in the UK always happen on April the 5th, etc. So why would, you've suddenly got millions of people doing the taxes, or certainly millions of people doing them late as well, to be fair. But, there's a glut of stuff coming through. So yeah, it is surprising, but actually, the governments can be quite good at that kind of thing, and it needs to happen. Let's be fair on that side of it. The one thing, just to build on the Mac adoption piece again, and and that front end piece is, there's no denying it. I think it's probably worth mentioning. There has been a bit of a backlash in this year where some of the projects just haven't gone live, or they've been going for 3 years. And you should never devalue the value of experts. So, you look at the successful projects, some that won awards at Mach 3 this year. So Pro Tire, Mitchell Dever, Rick, not Mitchell Dever, who are based, just up the road from me. That was a brilliant project that went live on time. They've got a really nice, true Mac story built out of various Mac components. Clark's, done by Grid Dynamics, again, really good implementation. I think it's Thomas Tools. I can't remember what the other technologies are. And then Brompton, done by the guys at E2X Applied Digital, right? Again, that's a really fast Mac project that made significant changes to the business, and the conversion rate went through the roof there. So they launched as quick as they could, if you know what I mean. Same with White Stuff as well. So, so there are success stories out there, but that's all down not all down, but a lot of it's down to the agencies and then having a customer that understands, the value of building a true agile project. Is it good enough? That's always my MVP. Good enough. Someone says it's the enemy of perfect. Yeah, maybe it is, but good enough, probably better than what you've got. If it's better than what you got, get it live, move on, iterate it, and that's how you're going to progress, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, agreed.
I think that backlash is an interesting thing. And it's something that also in 25 we'll have much more open and honest conversations about, and need to have them, about what went wrong there. And I in the prep for this, I watched a few episodes and I heard one of the MACH vendors say, well, the things that go wrong, I don't want to talk bad about our customers, but really our customers kind of screwed that up, you guys. That's a little too convenient now, isn't it? And I think that it's on the vendors to ensure success, not selling that license. That is, 1990s software sales. As a vendor, you need to ensure success, and that means you need to have a clear conversation with your buyers, with your prospects about, is this the right fit for you or not? And you cannot in a SaaS world go in and say, oh, it's their fault. You need to simplify to the extent that the mistakes that happened in the last years don't happen. You need to build alliances with other vendors to fill the gaps. You need to educate your SIs and agencies, but it's 100% on the MACH vendors to ensure these projects are successful. And I've heard shame attached to the failure of those projects, and I think we all know a few names, where they didn't dare to talk about the fact that they failed because it might mean they're not mature enough and their team isn't good enough. And I just want to say, no. We need to hear about the failures. We need to hear about what went wrong so we can make sure we help others and we put the right processes and the right technology in place so brands do succeed. And not talking about something, making a taboo, it's never been a good thing in this world. So I think that's also a 25 thing for us to sort out.
So has the backlash, and I've heard that phrase mentioned a number of times this year, has that been the driver for their recent change in their vision and their mission? And how does that change address the challenges that we're talking about?
It has not been the driver for it, but I do think that it comes together very nicely to solve two challenges at the same time. The driver, Tim, is really that the original intention of the MACH Alliance, that original vision was to advance and promote the adoption of open best of breed and composable technologies. And now we're at the end of 24, and we often forget this was a vision and mission we had in 2019. Like before COVID, 83% of executives woke up and thought digital was a nice to have in 2019, said Forrester Research in 2019. And then the pandemic happened, and then everything got a little different, right? But you already feel that. I hope that vision was about the technology and propelling the technology. And when you'd ask the founding partners at the time, what is the alliance going to be in 5 years? Most of us actually believed the alliance would probably not be needed anymore back in 2019, because our goal was, let's shake up the vendor space. Let's make sure established technology doesn't get away with selling hosted services as cloud native and those sort of things. And we've achieved that. I think we've rattled a lot of cages. We were the rebels back then. We were, a little spunkier than others. Roadmaps at big technology companies have been changed. Adoption of SaaS, adoption of cloud, adoption of headless, API first, or at least API all, has gotten a lot faster. So yay, we've done that. But then the question is, okay, can now everybody use it? Maybe not yet. And that's where the new vision talks about we want to create a future so that every business is empowered to use this new tech ecosystem that is there. And the focus is now on the businesses that use it, not anymore on the technology only. And so what was the driver? The driver was we've accomplished sort of goal one. MACH and Composable are an understood, established way of doing commerce, in this case, digital experience in general. Now the next question is how can we make sure everybody succeeds fast and gets to their goals? And then it's about the business more than about M and A and C and H.
I can't really add anything to that, Sonja, funny enough. Other than sitting on the C-suite board and going to the MACH events, I'm not really part of the reasons for it. But therefore, as somebody a little bit more external, a member of, but not on the kind of ruling board of it at all, it's refreshing to see. And what I would say again is any organization or company that succeeds is one that listens to the market, listens to its customers, listens to its partners and members. And then evolves accordingly. So, this newer vision is an evolution. It's not a revolution, isn't it? If you know what I mean. And it makes absolute sense because, like you said, 2019 was the very beginning of this as a thing. It's like, come on, guys, this is the right way to do stuff. Everyone kind of gets it now. We've got customers like Naveed Bellstaff on stage saying, "I built my project around MACH principles." So the message is there, and now it's about how that gets, like you say, gets involved in more things ultimately to make sure that ultimately we are currently making the technical world a better place. I think, which is a bold vision, but definitely part of it.
Yeah, and just to make that clear, I am also just on the advisory board nowadays. The kudos here, and it's been a brave step. Let's face it, to change something. So it's an evolution, but it's also a fundamental shift. That kudos to that 100% goes to Kasper Rasmussen and Holly Hall as the two leading, and the executive board now, Jasmine Goodman and Kristen Aragon. They've been fundamental in making this happen. It was gutsy, respect to doing that. Yeah.
Okay, so the change has happened. And the outgoing vision and mission has been adapted to meet the changing demand, the changing landscape. How important do you guys think it is for the MACH Alliance now to set the standards in the industry, and what do you think the impact will be on the vendors and the buyers?
You saw me smile there, Sonja.
Yeah, you go.
I'm smiling actually because before. When we sold Soneric back in the day, I took a few years into kind of advisory land. I did literally nothing for 2 years. Did a lot of cycling, hence these, and did a sort of stage of Tour de France and whatnot. But in that advisory capacity, I had my own little consultancy, and I put a blog up one day calling for a almost like a W3 standard for e-commerce APIs, and it generated quite a lot of. Just before the MACH Alliance, actually, it was like early 2019. And I remember putting it out on LinkedIn, and I had a number of people, a number of MACH vendors or now MACH vendors go, "Whoa, we don't want to do that. It'll be a race to the bottom," et cetera, et cetera. But other people going, "Actually, that'd be a really nice thing." Now, I don't think the MACH Alliance should be like a W3C personally. Based on the kind of feedback from that, you can't impose on vendors. I don't think this is how products should be modeled, or this is how data should be passed across. That is too much control, and I don't think that'll ever happen. But asking that question, like imposing standards, that's not it. I think the standards really are around patterns and around integration patterns and around how to not just do the technical side of the business, but to get kind of microservice based thinking into your organization. So using Patchworks as an example again, because I'm in control of this business, I'll talk about it. What was interesting for me is when we launched what's still being called our new platform, but it came out last April, into a beta, to be fair. What was interesting was watching the testing come in. Because we are true microservices based, different product teams could work on different bits of the platform. And so the integration testing was that much easier because it all kind of just worked, right? You're based on contract-based development. And by having these sort of separate teams working in collaboration, daily stand-ups across the teams, everyone understood what was going on, but they were working on their microservice, they were working on this piece that then kind of fitted into the dashboard, was just brilliant to see. And that's not just something I don't think for the technical side of the business, but for the business in general. So, ultimately, you don't want to create silos, but you want to create teams that work well on the piece of work that they're doing for that piece, quickly, agile development, 2-week sprints, etc. But as part of a greater whole. So they understand what the vision is. They understand what that part of the vision is. They deliver that part of the vision. And then, as a business, you can say, okay, great. Well, now I need you to work on this. And I think actually that's quite a nice way to structure a business in general, not just a software development project or product, if you know what I mean. It's very much more, actually, if there are parts of the business where, think about a retailer right now, they're gearing up for Black Friday, right? So you're going to have the photography team doing their bit, you're going to have the marketing team doing their bit, you're going to have the warehouse team getting ready for that bit. You can build those as almost products, if you know what I mean, and as almost have the separate sort of microservice teams or service teams working on that together. And if you don't include somebody like the customer success on their side, the people who are going to be manning the phones, if the warehousing team do have a problem, or if there is a problem with delivery, like everyone remembers the Royal Mail strike in the UK a couple of years ago over Black Friday. It was an absolute nightmare for anybody delivering stuff. How do you deal with it? So you can take some of those kind of tenets of the MACH Alliance and actually apply them to your organization as well, and become a better and more agile organization. It's not just about the technical side of it, is something I would add there. A little bit complex and strategic thinking, but I've seen it working. Again, these kind of newer vendors that are coming up, the Castors of this world, who have grown from 10 to 200 plus million very, very quickly. They are structured very differently from a high street brand that's been around for 100 years in the UK, with those silos in place. And therefore, they're that much more agile. They can go out and do a team kit deal, or they can go out and do a deal with a smaller school, to have branded schoolwear for their sports teams. Stuff that would take a long time and probably would take 6 months of a committee to think about, if you know what I mean. And you see it not just in retail, places like Octopus Energy as well. They've got that kind of founder mentality that gets talked about on LinkedIn and in business journals. That all comes from that kind of MACH way of thinking.
Yeah, my opinion has changed so much over the last few years on that question of standardization. When I was the president of the MACH Alliance, actually one of my goals was this year, we're going to get the standards. Like, I had the clipboard, I had the pen, I was ready to hum. And then we tried. And to your point, I just had to learn the hard way what you intuitively knew, Jim. There was no inherent interest of the vendors to really come together and do that. So when you look at now who is driving the interoperability task force and the actual results that are happening, and the patterns and the best practices, it comes from the system integrator side of the house predominantly, and a few, very forward-thinking vendor individuals. But 100%, and I think I'd even go a step further. Since then, the AI-driven integration interoperability, the way that Gen AI can now read self-descriptive APIs. Is that the right term, Jim?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
APIs. Like, I've seen this MVP just last week where a tool went in, read the APIs from one vendor, read the APIs from a different vendor, self-interpreted the mapping, and built a connection in front of my eyes in a matter of, well, I want to say minutes, but the minutes was the talking. It was milliseconds. If we look at what does that mean for the MACH Alliance, I think it's not so much those clipboard standards we need to do, it's the clarity. Clarity is more important than uniformity. So do the MACH member, and I'm just making this up, this is not MACH Alliance driven, but do all APIs describe themselves sufficiently? Is there enough documentation that a machine can understand how to work with it? I think those aspects will be more important than, do we call color with an O or an OU, or, you know, those nitty-gritty things don't matter anymore.
It doesn't matter either, because AI will sort that out too.
But you know what I mean? Like, I think the whole paradigm and the whole task has changed in the last 12, 18 months, from rigorous defining something to enabling the machines to figure it out.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. I don't remember you at our internal product demo. I'd love to know where else you saw that.
Oh, we can talk about that afterwards.
Well, it's all about, I mean, there's a lot, it's a classic hype cycle, isn't it, with AI? Everyone shouted about how they had it last year. But what did it mean, really? And I spoke to a vendor at a conference. It wasn't a MACH conference. And I said, oh, well, you know, so what is your AI? And he said, well, to be honest with you, it's a huge team offshore. I'm like, okay, so it's not AI, then, if you know what I mean.
It's mechanical too.
It's mechanical, it's people, basically. Yeah, it's not AI. But it is there without a doubt. And so, you know, we have to run towards it at the right time. And that's exactly the kind of thing, you know, like you say, the being able to ingest API documentation for two vendors, which is easier if those vendors are already in Patchworks for us, because we've already got our connection to it. So it's all the same format on our side. Throwing out a large learning model and doing the auto mapping and building out the flows and stuff. I mean, that's got to be the way it goes, right? The interesting thing is then configuring that to work in production. And so using AI to work that out as well, if you know what I mean. So it's all very well building it, come back to the point I made at the beginning, but you've got to host it and it's got to be scalable. But you'll find that some flows impact other flows. And, you know, maybe every Thursday your ERP does something that, you know, so therefore if you've got some sort of AI monitoring in there that can adjust how things are being flowed through, that's the other thing. I think it's going to get really interesting. And certainly, you know, where we're putting some of our research in development ultimately is around that in particular, because, like I said, once the plumbing's in, you just want it to work. But if you make it work really well and minimize your costs and maximize your return on investment, then that's what you need.
Mm-hmm. Can we touch on some of the pieces around non-MACH solutions? Because you mentioned something, Jim, around an interesting trend with non-MACH engines being composed with MACH solutions. What does that mean in your view? How's that play into the future of composable in digital commerce?
I was talking about Shopify, to be honest. So
yeah, let's name it.
Let's name it. Let's just get it right out there, which is quite hard for somebody who worked at big commerce, right? And trying to take them on. In kind of direct to consumer, everybody's having a conversation with them, I would argue, if they're looking at replatforming their e-commerce engine, because they're everywhere, right? And proven to work for large enterprises now. You know, we've got a 500 million euro plus German brand. They haven't announced themselves yet, so I can't say any more than that because they're slowly migrating off of Magento onto Shopify. But they looked at everybody else and they're like, do you know what? For what we do, there are enough examples of 10, 20, 30 million pound or euro brands or dollar brands on Shopify that do the same thing that we know it will work. It scales. And if you look at the kind of MACH tenants, you know, is it microservice? I don't know, is the honest answer. So I'm not going to go into that. But is it API first? Well, yes, actually, their APIs are really strong. They're really good at launching new APIs. They're just deprecating their old REST APIs over the next couple of years and replacing with a really nice GraphQL API, which is a lot more, a lot easier to use if you've got developers who know how to use that. So are they cloud? Yeah, they are. Are they headless? Yeah, they are now. Absolutely. You know, people have been building headless Shopify sites for ages as well. So they've got definitely got the ACH of the Mac, if you know what I mean. And that combined with their brand means that, you know, they're going to be part of your conversation if you're doing a direct consumer brand, particularly in fashion, because there are so many examples out there running on Shopify that do that. So increasingly, therefore, we get involved in a Shopify project with a lot of other Mac native vendors, like I said. So, we'll have a PIM that's come from Mac Alliance. We'll have a search and merch tool where we might be used for the ingestion piece, but, the actual kind of direct app will be used for the actual search piece within Shopify. There'll be content management coming in because, if they are a more sophisticated vendor, they probably want to create the content in one place, get it translated via another system, and then pushed into the right language Shopify store for that country. It's a really, really interesting development. And it isn't just B2C, B2B as well. I mean, the thing about Shopify is the amount of money they spend on R&D. And so, that's what's, I guess, quite scary for other vendors ultimately. Once you get a certain critical mass, that's the case. Now, at the same time, there are also reasons why people still go out and choose Centra or BigCommerce or Commerce Tools or Commerce Layer, because those platforms also bring things to them to the table that you might need, in terms of control of your experience, control of what you want to do at the back end, complex products maybe. Maybe there are B2B offerings that are still slightly more mature in some of those products as well. And so, but it's definitely there, and therefore we have to talk about it. And so it's an interesting one. They don't really engage with analysts either, do they, Sonja? So, but Gartner put them in the Magic Quadrant anyway, if you know what I mean, with a sort of a grey. We didn't talk to them, but here they are, kind of blob. And I think that's because of that. Was it Forrester? Sorry, yeah. That's because of their the head of steam they've got ultimately in that market. So. And then, in the older space, there's still people working on Salesforce as well. And again, you can't argue that Salesforce isn't cloud native. Well, you can argue that maybe the Commerce Cloud wasn't originally cloud native, but it certainly is now. It's certainly headless, and it's certainly APIs all over the place. So again, we still see large organizations choosing and working with that, or maybe thinking, my Commerce Engine's fine. It's the other bits of my tech stack that I need to drive towards Mac instead. So, I'm fine with the checkout. I'm fine with the way that people can find the stuff, but my product creation process is dreadful. So let's go and look down a way of doing kind of like the true product attribute entry, then the product content management using one of the PIMs out there, and then pushing that through. Then Mac 3, there was a brilliant presentation done by Mattel. And it was all about that content creation process. And ultimately, at the end, it spat into a Shopify store that they would throw up for a brand. But they were talking about, and I think I'll talk about this publicly because it was in the post Mac 3 documentation that came out. Barbie, when the Barbie film came out, it was massive. They were able to basically almost generate at industrial scale all this different content for all these little stores that all appeared in different countries on Shopify around the world. And then when the Barbie movies got through its kind of final end of its whatever hype cycle curve that the content providers use, Mattel were able to turn that off and move on to the next one. That's really fascinating.
Yeah. And it's a wonderful example for where a MACH-enabled content management system, which was in place at the time, actually enabled this process. So I think all know that having multi-country and multi-brand stores with Shopify isn't as easy as we'd all love it to be. But to your point, supplementing it then with a CMS that can go into that stack will do the function that I, as a brand, in this case, as Mattel, want to have. And I think that's where we're going to have much more conversations. Is Shopify enterprise ready? I don't know. Kind of depends on the enterprise. I know from evaluations I've been privy to that there are certain functions that Shopify isn't all that great at. Maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not. But the M, the A, the C, the H, they are by and large not differentiating anymore. We can have a religious conversation about should the M look like this or should the M look like that. I don't know who we're helping with that at the end of the day, honestly. But absolutely. And also that kind of, again, demanded a new approach to the MACH Alliance and to go away from the definitions to what is it we're trying to achieve here. So the conversation goes towards the function. And I think Shopify has come in beautifully leveraging that buyers are looking more for what's your vision, what's your roadmap. They have proven how quickly they can shift their tech in the last few years when demand went there. They have sufficient resources to adjust to whatever the future is bringing They're doing a pretty good job articulating their vision as well. And they're not beating that cloud native kind of drum that the majority of folks don't care that much about because it's a tick box somewhere. And if you're then a vendor in the core MACH environment and you're still talking only about headless commerce or API first commerce, and you forget to talk about the value and your vision and your customer success, you're going to lose, right? Because your conversation, your story is not relevant to the buyer in 24, 25. And kudos to Shopify. I'm not a fan of their tech, I'll say that, right? But I don't have to be. I think their go-to-market is excellent.
So in your view then, we're talking about blended solutions, hybrid solutions. What do these mean for the composability standards and the role of the MACH Alliance?
Okay, so first, I think this whole idea of is it MACH pure or is it non-MACH comes from a North American, actually, correction, a US approach to MACH. When you've spoken to European members and European co-founders, we never had this harsh divide. It was always clear there will always be a blended view. And then our American friends, we all love them dearly, but they have an us versus them mentality. I think we've seen that over the last few weeks beautifully again, right? So it's always been this way, Tim. We're just having a bit more open conversation about the fact that naturally MACH and non-MACH always have to play together, especially in enterprise settings.
Yeah.
Actually, I polarize saying that now with US versus Europe. I'm sorry for that, but it's kind of true, right?
I did like to say something. I mean, yeah. No, it's true though. I mean, there are cultural differences without doubt, right? And I think the important thing is to come back to something you said earlier, Sonja. It's about the value to the end customer. That's all that really matters. So how quickly, people want to change tech for a reason. What is that reason? Let's try and work out what it is. Is it to save money? Is it to open new markets? Is it to, as part of maybe a growing your top line? Is it all of those things? Let's concentrate on something, we can bite off now and go down that route. Then it's what's the best solution to it, right? You've heard me, I'm going to say it again, I've said it in numerous podcasts and all the time about the hammer anti-pattern, right? If you've only got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So what you need is a toolbox, right? So you go and say, what's the best tool for now, for me, for that? And it could be that the best tool at the front end for an e-commerce platform is Shopify, because I can get a site stood up in, one of their partners, Herbert, stood up a site for, I think it's Flying Tiger Copenhagen. I saw on LinkedIn in 8 days, right? So I can get something up really quickly that's good enough. They're happy with ShopPay. We can go with that, and that's going to work there. What's the real business problem? Well, the real business problem is they need to be like we talked about with Mattel. They need to be live in 27 countries really quickly, or they need to be able to create content at industrial scale, like some of the big sneaker vendors do, if you know what I mean, for all the different markets. That's the interesting point. Okay, so we do that bit really easily with that, and then maybe we'll revisit it in the future if we need to. But this other piece is where we can go out to the MACH vendors and say, oh, okay, you can answer this question for me, right? And while we've been talking, I've been thinking about this. It's the A in MACH. That's the really important bit, that APIs, because if you can get human understandable machine interaction, right? And this is why the APIs became such a big thing. That's one of the real reasons that you can make composability easier. But with AI coming up as well, that's the kind of real bit, because then machines can understand that content. It's not just about talking to each other and connecting those APIs up. And that's where you can truly industrialize some of that stuff. And so that's coming back to the sort of top of the conversation. That's the real kind of prediction there, is the machine readable and understandable data coming out of these APIs is frankly going to make that kind of integration piece and make the businesses that embrace it more successful than the ones that won't. I think that's probably the simplest way to look at it from that side.
Yes, 100%. And I think an important question for a buyer, for a brand to ask is also, why is that technology non-MACH? Is it because they don't meet the criteria? And we've had a few recent rejections where a piece of software was not SaaS, was not multi-tenant SaaS, to Jim's earlier point, was still essentially infrastructure in the cloud. Not cool. You do not want to buy that stuff right now, right? Is it non-MACH because the vendor, for whatever reason, decided not to be part of the MACH alliance, but still essentially fulfills that criteria? Great. You know, we've said that before. There was backlash. There's lots of reasons why maybe you're not philosophically aligned. Wonderful, right? What the MACH certification does help with, though, is it saves you as a buyer to do the due diligence, because it's pretty rigid, it's pretty hard to get in. So if there is a MACH certification stamp on there, you don't have to ask so many rough, tough questions yourself, and that's handy. But it doesn't mean if a vendor doesn't have a MACH stamp that it's bad tech by default.
If we could just go back a little bit to the rise of the solutions like Shopify, do you think that due to that sharp rise, that traditional vendors are feeling pressured? And if they are, how would you expect them or like them to respond?
Make it simpler. Just please make it simple. Make it simple, make it fast. Take a lesson from that book of Shopify. Oh, a Gartner analyst said to me a few weeks ago when we had a discussion about usability in enterprise. He said, also by the way, 50 plus, right? Just to ageism here a little. Well, you know, Sonja, let's be real here. Enterprise users, they're used to work with crap interfaces, right? And yes, I work with SAP R3, right? I know what bad user interfaces look like. But I think it is really, really dangerous to assume that the now users and the now buyers in enterprise organizations still are willing to cope with that stuff. And Shopify does it fantastic. It's simple, it's easy. You're up fast, matter of days, insane. So, dear other vendors, there's your bar, right?
Yeah. It's that cohort piece again. I think that's really interesting because, and just a little aside, I can remember having that exact conversation 20 years ago, putting ATG in at Friends Provident, and they had mainframe backends, and we were replacing a bit of the mainframe backend with some internal stuff. And I was like, well, we'll get user experience people in. And their architect said, no, we won't. They're used to it. We'll just train them. Who cares? It's like, no, think of it differently. And now, if you've got somebody who is a millennial, a Gen Z or Z, I have to say Gen Z because my kids who are Gen Z say Z, which is really annoying. And who maybe they've started their own business. They've installed Zero because it's really cheap, and they've used Zero and it's really good. It's got a lovely user interface and it works, right? At back end, I've used Zero myself in the past. And then you try and get them to use a traditional ERP vendor or accounting software. They're not going to put up with it. They're going to go and find a kind of a challenger brand, which is enterprise ready, that feels and works like Zero, or try and work around, I want to put Zero in. I want to put other things around the outside of it. So as the users get more tech savvy and more used to good user interfaces, it will impact what you're selling there and how you build that product without doubt. Tim, quick question for you. What do you mean by traditional vendors, just out of interest as well, to sort of help define that question?
What do I mean by traditional vendors?
Yeah.
I would say that we're looking at, for me, the traditional SAP Hybris.
Yes.
Commerce Cloud, the vendors that over the past 10 years have dominated the demand that we've seen for project teams when delivering those monolith implementations. That's my take on it.
Yeah.
No, fair play.
So and then interesting, if you think about the buying side, I think one thing we didn't yet really talk about in a straight way is for the other vendors, it's also really important to get their agency and SI relationships, that partner satisfaction that Jim just spoke about, to the next level, because they do have much more influence in purchase and retention decisions than vendors like to believe. And I think for the buyers at the same end, it's important to critically look at their agency partners and wonder, are they making sure their banks are empty, or are they giving me genuine advice, what's best for me? And also there, Shopify has done a really good job in the last few quarters, even, not even years, to attract interesting agencies and help them up level from possibly SMB work to more enterprise savvy as well. Mm-hmm.
So
and the reason I asked him, sorry, just quickly, is because another prediction, those large companies, they are rich, they have cash. I would not be surprised to see them buying some of the MACH Alliance vendors, which would be interesting for the MACH Alliance membership, of course, Sonja, although we have changed the rules on that slightly, I believe. Yes. But, you know, I was, as you know, working with Hybris when they got bought by SAP. They released SAP Web Commerce 3.0, I seem to remember, on the Monday. And it looked quite good. And they built that product themselves, and they bought Hybris on the Thursday. And basically end of life SAP Web Commerce at the time. You could see, you know, there are some very cheap MACH Alliance member commerce companies out there at the moment, I would argue, and I wouldn't be surprised to see an SAP, an Oracle, or somebody like that who've got deep pockets thinking, actually, we want to be in here at some point. And look, you know, Oracle, they're beginning to buy almost anybody, you know, as are SAP to a certain extent. There could be some really interesting moves coming forward in the next 18 months or so, if people think that e-commerce is still worth doubling down on in that regard.
That's another 2025 prediction there, Jim.
Could be 26. Yeah. Let's call it 28. Who cares by then?
Do we want the vendors to keep it simple? As my drama teacher said to me, keep it simple, stupid, and do it quickly. So there's lots of challenges and lots of opportunities for the vendors. How, in your view, as the last question from me, are they failing to adjust to the challenging needs of the market?
The traditional vendors again, or everybody? Yeah.
I think both. It's interesting from my point of view to understand both, particularly what you've just said there, Jim, which is actually you think some of the traditional vendors are going to start to look at acquisitions to get themselves back in the game. Is that fair to say?
Certainly in the case of Oracle, who don't currently have a web offering, right? But they've got still 80 plus customers running on ATG, from what I understand. But the end of life did publicly, I seem to remember, about 18 months ago, and there is literally nothing you could buy from them to do that work. But where do we start? Sonja said, let's look at traditional vendors first. I mean, I lived through that Hybris to SAP acquisition. And big companies deal with partners as a partner, and they deal with partners in a different way, right? So come back to Sonja's point, putting partners first, keeping them first. Like, interestingly, SAP then bought another company that we have as a partner at Patchworks and Marsis, and they actually let them run pretty much separately still. There is some SAP-ness in the background, but that experience is much better than the experience we went through about, I'd say, 18 months into the Hybris time, once the founders left and, you know, all the partner people left. And, you know, the whole structure became much more about what can you do for me? What leads can you bring for me? What more of SAP can you sell? Nothing wrong with that. And that's how traditional SAP partners work. But is that really answering the commerce partners requirement? Not really. And similar thing happened with Oracle and ATG. I know some of their partners were literally got told you have to be able to sell every single part of the Oracle tech stack, or that's it. You won't be able to sell ATG or work with us on ATG anymore. So it leads to interesting and different behaviors, i.e. big companies thinking that everybody's a big company. So I would say, you know, actually transform your organization via the companies you buy, rather than, you know, if that happens, rather than trying to impose. Although it's a winning success from a numbers perspective, you're having to buy the company for a reason, if you know what I mean. If you're going down that route, if you're looking at the MACH vendors that, you know, that are listening or not listening, again, I'll come back to what I said before. Make sure that you've got, you know, great partner management, and Sonja said the same thing. Again, come back to your point. I mean, we put in an implementation success team to work with our partners who are building on Patchworks to make sure that we don't have any churn on our side before it launches, right? Make sure things are done the right way, that certain patterns are being followed for, if a back-end system's down, there's a sweeper to pick up the orders that go through, that kind of good stuff. That's important. So make sure that you've got that success team in place on that side of it. And then listen to what the market wants, like really listen. So we have a monthly partner and customer get together where we get all the ideas, and anyone who can attend, and raise them as tickets, they get grouped into the backlog and come into the product from that side of it. But also it might be like, oh, your commercials are changing because there's this new person out here that's doing this in a different way. It could be, in the commerce vendor space, we're seeing Shopify a lot more, or one of their kind of competitors who've got. Years ago when I was at Big Commerce, I was presenting to one of the big 5 consultancies, and they went, "Yeah, this looks like a great accelerator, but how long does it take to get that working?" Because they're thinking of the accelerators in the traditional way, the old hybris, commerce store type thing. I was like, no, this isn't. This is multi-tenant SaaS. You can sign up to a trial account now, and you get this. You get a shop. You can put a shop live in an hour if you really want to, as long as you've got the payment provider set up. If you know what I mean. Oh, right. That's what people are kind of used to now. So if it takes a year to get you live for whatever reason, because you don't have that accelerator in place, listen to the market, come up with something that allows you to deal with that, because that's probably why you're starting to lose against the rise of the SaaS platform. As always, I've spoken too much. So over to you, Sonja. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm with you. Totally with you. I'd say also, I'll stick with the MACH vendors. There's certain things you will not be able to compete on, to your point, investment that an SAP or an Adobe or a Shopify can make into the product, into the roadmap. If you can beat that. So there's other ways to speak to that new buying audience. And I want to say easiest, but that's because I think in vision and strategy and future, the fastest way, I guess, to open up other ways of differentiation is to articulate your vision for the future, for the market, and for your product better. And I see vendors by and large do a terrible job at that right now. If you go and ask, here's a challenge, go and ask someone that should be able to answer the question, what's your vision for category in the next 5 years, 2030? Most will start with insert name, will be a market leader in blah, blah, blah. That's not a vision, right? That's a goal that you have to be a market leader. Everybody does that. What's your vision? What's the world going to be like? What's your role in it? What pain will you solve? And it's scandalous how few can answer that. But then if you can't compete anymore on the M, the A, the C, the H, if you can't compete on your development budget, you better have a better vision for the future so you can convince your buyers. So that's something to invest in.
Perfect. Thank you very much, guys, for your time. That has been incredibly insightful. I have other questions, but there is someone that you can't see literally kicking me out of the room because we have another podcast coming straight after this. But I really appreciate time. Incredibly insightful, and I think the audience that we have built up over the past 5 years will take a huge amount from that, and I've also learned a substantial amount too. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. I know you said we're going to go head to head. Did we agree too much?
I think probably a little bit more passive aggressive would have gone down okay, but no, we're fine.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks for having us on, Tim.
Thanks, guys.